Vampires. Hello and welcome back to High Contrast Criticism, and I'm your host, Toby. So, vampires. We all love a good vampire, right? But there's not that many great films of vampires, are there, really? I mean, there's a lot of decent films, there's a lot of classic films that we all revere, but I think there's something about the vampire that we don't really take that seriously, at least not anymore. You know, the long capes, the big pointy teeth, the turning into the bats and the wolves and all that, the living in an old decrepit castle. It's all a bit goofy, so many films don't really even try to make them work that well, because they know the audience for it aren't really always signing up for a serious and therefore all that good film. But you're here today to find out the top 20 vampire films, and that's what we're going to find out. But of course, there's two disclaimers. The first disclaimer is, well, believe it or not, but I've not seen every vampire film in existence, so yes, sorry, I am a fraud, but if your favourite vampire film is on screen right now, then unfortunately I've not seen it. Sorry. The second disclaimer is, well, this is my opinion, and look at the posters around this room. I mean, Maniac Cop, not exactly a classic, is it? But I have the poster. But yes, my logic is a film is a film. I don't really care if a film has influenced, everyone in the world, it's really groundbreaking and important in its genre, or it did a certain thing first. It resonates with me and it entertains me, then that's what I'm judging it on. So yes. Anyway, top 20 vampire films.
I am Dracula.
Number 20 is Dracula, 1931 Dracula, starring Bela Lugosi. Now yes, this is a classic, but unfortunately I don't really get on with older films that much. I don't mean 2002 old, I mean 1920s, 1930s, 1940s. I find just the acting style in these films very bombastic, and so I struggle to get immersed into the films for this reason. So even though I might respect its craft and find it visually beautiful, which this film certainly is, nevertheless I find it sort of difficult to get into and really appreciate on that level. But nevertheless, Dracula, I do really like this film because it has a real emphasis on Renfield. Now, Renfield is a character who I think is probably my favourite character in the book. The way it explores the psychological terror of the character, the sort of collapse into insanity. I found it really affecting in the book, and I don't think any other adaptation of Dracula really does his character justice. He's kind of sidelined as sort of the loopy, sort of weird side character, whereas here, the film starts with Renfield. I like that change from the book, because you get to see a sort of sane Renfield and connect with him before he becomes demented. He sort of often spices up a lot of the sort of talking and standing around in this film that I don't like. He sort of just appears in the room and it doesn't really make sense how he's there. It makes you appreciate very simple things in the art of filmmaking, because of course they're dealing with sort of limited technology in terms of how clunky it is at the time. So they do simple things like we'll put a little white spotlight on Dracula's eyes in the close-up, and it goes from, oh, you're a gentleman, where did you get your suit, to bloody hell, he's hypnotising me, and it's just really simple techniques like that they use that I find very inspiring, because they're simple but they still work. You don't need to be flashy or out there or radical to tell a good story, and I think these kinds of films do teach that. But in terms of plotting, I mean, if you know Dracula, this classic, I mean, it's not going to surprise you much there. If you've not seen it, just watch it for the visual iconography more than anything else.
How are those maggots?
Number 19 is The Lost Boys. So yes, The Lost Boys, another classic. Many would say probably should be higher than 19, and I do have a lot of childhood nostalgia for this film. I remember growing up with it. I remember the dangling on the bridge, the motorbikes, the saxophone, all that stuff. I have a lot of fond memories, but when I rewatched it not long ago, I mean, as much as I love the 80s, I felt like something was missing in the film for me, because sure, it's meant for adolescence and it sort of falls in that category with the Goonies, where you watch it as a teen and it's really fun and funny and a bit edgy. It's got an amazing soundtrack. I love Echo and the Bunnymen, and their cover of The Doors, People Were Strange, here is wonderful. But there's a lack of oomph, there's a lack of, I guess, gore, really, is what I'm sort of looking for in a film like this. There's a lot of sort of flying around with the camera, sort of vampire POV, and there's sort of moments of darkness, there's sort of bombast towards the end, but, too much of this film sort of spent with Jason Patrick and his sort of new girlfriend and that whole romance plot, and that part I find so boring, even for a silly film like this. I mean, I know nothing about the girl, I have no reason to care about her. I just want more time with Kiefer Sutherland and his vampire gang, really, because they look so cool. I mean, look, the worm scene's iconic, the whole ending's iconic. It is still a very funny film, and it's very comfy. I mean, as someone who loves the 80s, it's got those vibes, but sure, there's the whole themes of adolescence and rebellion and sort of escapism there, but I just think as an actual film, as an actual thrill ride, compared to other 80s vampires films, it's a lot more tame. But even so, it was very formative for me growing up and definitely pushed me in a certain direction aesthetically. So I'm very grateful for this film. I just wish on rewatch it held up a bit more.
You needn't be afraid, she's dead.
Number 18 is Brides of Dracula. So Brides of Dracula is a Hammer horror film, and it's got Peter Cushing still as Van Helsing, who is absolutely wonderful, but it's not got any Christopher Lee, unfortunately, which is probably the biggest issue with this film, which isn't really like an active issue, but more just an omission. But there's a sort of younger equivalent of Dracula, and of course he has brides, and there's some very creepy moments in this film where one of them is being resurrected. That's quite chilling, and it's just got wonderful costumes and set design like any Hammer horror film does, but it really stands out here in terms of the lighting and the colour, and it's a very standard sort of story. Girl goes to this castle, accidentally lets out this vampire, he goes on a sort of maniacal run and killing all these ladies, and Van Helsing comes in to save the day, but it's just sort of very well executed. And again, Peter Cushing is just so delightful and wholesome as Van Helsing, and he really, in the contrast of the very sort of exuberant decadence of the vampire, he's just sort of that just calming, wonderful force who you could just happily sit down with and just watch for hours and hours. And he is by far my favourite version of Van Helsing, even compared to the books. In the books, Van Helsing is rambly and hyper and annoying, like me, and in here he's just very calm and stoic and still witty and warm, but he's just Peter Cushing at his very best. Hammer Horror are very good at making very laconic, quick films that sort of have very high viscera, very small plotting. I mean, you can't really remember any of the characters other than Van Helsing, and the guy who plays the sort of young equivalent of Dracula, I mean, he's fine, he's a bit more talkative and suave than Christopher Lee. He was a bit more of a creep, so it makes sense that it's sort of a different version of the vampire that has all these brides, and there's a more hedonistic aspect going on there. But he has no candle to Christopher Lee, obviously. But this, nevertheless, is a solid film.
Alright, let's go kill us a fucking vampire.
Now, number 17. Number 17 is Abigail, a recent release, and yes, above classics like The Lost Boys and Bela Lugosi's Dracula. I know, crazy, right? I really fucking enjoyed this film. Okay, look, I had one reason for watching this film other than I'm doing this video. That one reason is Dan Stevens. I love Dan Stevens in absolutely everything. I find him so watchable and entertaining. At the end of the day, the film was free on Sky. I have a TV there, I have a bed down there, and I thought, fuck it, I'll watch it. It's 90 minutes, it could be entertaining, and boy was it entertaining. I just thought that this film was so fun and so funny and so delightful for a slasher film, because it's basically a heist film turned a sort of vampire stuck in a house film, and it's very limited sets, but it really allows it to focus on the characters. And the thing I love about this film, like I really love, is that it's a slasher film with all the fun, gory, explosive kills, like exploding corpses and all that. Like, it's really fun in that regard, but what makes it like really entertaining and really just nice for me is that it has really likeable characters. I mean, sure, they're stupid, sure, they're not fucking three-dimensional, sure, they're sort of a bit of melodrama that's a bit too earnest and tacked on. And sure, the plot itself is really clunky and sort of all over the place, but when the core characters, first of all, live actually for quite a long time. You think of a slasher film, they all go down one by one, but a lot of these characters actually live for quite a while, and that's really refreshing. They've got such a great chemistry with one another that's really endearing. I mean, Dan Stevens, he's absolutely wonderful as this sort of just cold dickhead, but he's still humorous, and so you still kind of like him. You know, I really enjoy characters like that, and he's great with that. And he's got that funny line about, yeah, it's fucking onions when they're trying to find garlic, and that's just, it's his delivery there. It's so funny. Fucking Kevin Durand as buff Elon Musk. That's how he looks in this film to me. He's so entertaining, sort of lovably goofy. The girl from Lisa Frankenstein, she's really good. The main character, whose name I forget, she's very good. Matthew Good as Discount Dracula. I mean, I want to see him as Dracula now. He's got a cameo at the end of the film that I really like. The whole cast are just really charming, and sure, it's got that sort of, you know, sort of ironic, satirical sort of quips all through the film that people might find annoying, because I think it's been done a lot in recent years, particularly in like sort of Marvel and Star Wars and crap like that. But you know, if it's funny, it's funny, and I found it funny. I found it really funny, and I had a really enjoyable time. And it's got a little vampire child who's a ballerina, and normally the whole child vampire thing really doesn't work for me, because I'm like, oh, I'm a 13-year-old girl, but I'm actually 200. I'm just like, fuck off. Like, it's just, I can't take it seriously. But this film, I think, plays into that. She's not really given too much exposure as a sort of child vampire. It's done in just the right way, and I just had a blast with this film. I really did. So on pure entertainment factor, I enjoyed it slightly more than Lost Boys and Dracula and Brides of Dracula. What can I say? I mean, above these classics, roast me, okay? But I really enjoyed Abigail. I highly recommend it for a good piece of innocent fun.
Tell me, Des, do you think it was the bliss or the blood?
Number 16 is Bliss. Now, Bliss is another relatively recent release. It's sort of a low budget, sort of very scuzzy, sort of 80s inspired, very neon infused, very gory film. Not much deep going on at all. Directed by Joe Bagos, I believe his name is. Cast is full of people I don't really know, other than there's like one guy from like The Purge in it, in a minor role. But yes, it's just sort of a very hazy, scuzzy, just sort of grungy little film that has so much gore. It's so unhinged. All the characters are dickheads, but they're likeable dickheads because they're funny, and it's just sort of vampire, sort of hazy nightclub erotic extravaganza. Okay, it is Bliss. All right. It's sort of like an Abel Ferrari movie, very much like an Abel Ferrari movie, actually. If you like The Driller Killer, which is a film I love, it's a lot like The Driller Killer. If you like The Addiction, which is a film I absolutely fucking hate, okay, I hate that film. I know other people like that film. I really hate The Addiction, okay? I just find it to be so much just philosophical jargon that it's just sort of pretentious and just gibberish to me. Okay, I'm interested in philosophy, but not when it's a sort of vampire film like this that takes itself so seriously and just jabbers on and on and on. And you mean, you have Christopher Walken who comes in for like 10 minutes as a vampire. I think that's fucking cool, and he just spews philosophy and then leaves. I mean, fucking hell. Anyway, that's not going to be on this list. But yes, Bliss is sort of like an Abel Ferrara movie in that, again, it's very sort of grimy, and bad people are fun and good people are annoying. It's classic Abel Ferrara in that way. But of course, it's not an Abel Ferrara movie. It's sort of like a modern rendition of his older work, and vampires. And it's just really, really fun and brutal and just lots of blood and guts. There's really not much to it. It's got some very sort of dynamic, sort of pulsating camera work and that kind of thing. It's very grainy, and it's just very delightful in that way. And you know, it doesn't really live long in the memory. I gave this film a 9 out of 10 while I was watching it. I'd probably give it like an 8 now. But these kind of films, they don't need to live long in the memory. It doesn't have to be all that deep. It's visceral, it's stimulating, it's like Bliss, and sometimes that's all I'm really looking for. Number 15 is The Night Flyer, a Stephen King adaptation, probably one of his most underrated in my opinion, and it follows Miguel Ferrier from Twin Peaks and other stuff, and he's a sort of very sort of cynical tabloid journalist, and he's eventually sort of tracking down this vampire who murders people and flies on a plane, which is just really cool imagery. There's lots of cool imagery and concepts in this film, as per most Stephen King things. It's sort of a TV movie, I think. Maybe it had a limited release. There's a director's cut. I think I highly recommend the director's cut over the other version. And there's a lot of imagery, but it's very low budget, and there is a sort of lack of cinematic style to it. There is sort of very funky, sort of Lucio Fulci-esque, surreal black and white imagery towards the end, and the actual imagery of the vampire is very striking. There's some good practical effects, and there's some good kills, but there's not that much gore, or it is quite a serious film. Not completely. There's of course wit to it, but it's more about the atmosphere and the mystique of the vampire. Not much is ever really given away, because you think, well, why is he flying in a plane? Who is he really? And nothing is really given in depth, and I really enjoyed that. It's a very sort of actually quite haunting film. I mean, the ending is a sort of very quite impactful twist, I really enjoyed this film. I mean, Miguel Ferrer has a lot of great quips, and again, he's a dickhead, but he's a likeable dickhead, and so you get on board with him. None of the other characters really stood out at all for me. This is really just about the journalist and the vampire. Everyone else is kind of just sort of background noise, in my opinion. But it's a really engrossing film for what it is. It's sort of just a really nice, cozy, like atmospheric 90 minutes with some really fun imagery and ideas. It's a film that actually I think would do with a sort of more cinematic, high-octane remake at a higher budget, made by a really fun filmmaker. Who would do a good job? I mean, ideally you want someone like Argento in his prime to do a film like this. I feel like the whole scuzzy sort of journalism angle was sort of a bit like Deep Red in a way, the sort of imagery of the plane and the sort of weird, I think there's zombies towards the end, it's quite crazy in that regard, but I do wish it had a more cinematic thing going for it. It's a shame that it's so low budget, but there is also a comfort in that, and it's also quite a satire on journalism in general, which is always fun, because journalists are cockroaches after all. But yes, The Night Flyer, if you're a fan of Stephen King, and I have to say I am not the biggest fan of Stephen King, unfortunately. I don't hate him, I don't dislike him, but this film won me over anyway, so if you are a fan, I'm pretty sure you'll love this film.
You don't know what it's like, Charlotte, to live forever in darkness eternal.
Number 14 is Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust. It's an anime, and my god, is the animation absolutely beautiful. I mean, the character design, the set design, the detail, the shadows, it's gothic, phantasmagoric delight, and it's just wonderful. It is kind of the only thing this film has going for it, in my opinion. The actual plot is sort of sappy, sentimental, vampire melodrama. It's fine, but the characters in this, I mean, Dee is a great protagonist, but I'm only going off this and the 80s Vampire Hunter D film. I've not read any of the books that this is based on, but a lot of the characters the character designs are great, the concepts behind them, and in the action that plays out really well. There's one character who sort of fights through shadows and stuff like that, and that's really cool, but there is a sort of irritating sort of annoyingness to a lot of the characters in this. Like, for example, Dee has a sort of parasitic hand, and in the original Vampire Hunter D, the film, it's a sort of tormenting character, sort of speaks to his darkest thoughts and his inner conflict, as well as, being useful and having supernatural abilities. And it makes a really interesting dynamic here. But here, he's just kind of just a really annoying, bickering comic relief. It's like, oh no, we can't do that. Oh no, it's too risky. You're out of your mind. And it's just, it's so fucking annoying. And it really brought down the film for me. But the animation is so spectacular in this film that I have to put it this high. I think it's one of the most beautiful animated films I've ever seen. Like, really, Vampire Hunter D, Bloodlust, if you want just pure eye candy as a sort of animated vampire film with also werewolves and all sorts of just supernatural creatures and lots of killing and lots of sort of gothic anime melodrama, this film is absolutely splendid. There's absolutely nothing deeper going on at all, at least how I watched it. I mean, Dee is a sort of almost Clint Eastwood-esque sort of stoic, slightly supernatural protagonist with sort of inner conflicts, but ultimately he's sort of existing on the moral high ground, and he's half vampire himself, and it is a good film. The anime, I need to watch more anime. I only really watch Studio Ghibli for anime, of course. Maybe I need to get more used to it. But if you do like anime, you'll probably love this even more than me. And again, just in spite of all my many issues with this film's script in particular, just looking at this film,
God kills indiscriminately, and so shall we.
Number 13 is Interview with the Vampire. The film, yes, not the series. I've not seen the series. I can't compare it to that. Or the book. Books? I don't know. I can't remember. But yes, this maybe has my possibly favourite Tom Cruise performance in anything. I mean, Tom Cruise as Lestat, he's just maniacal, narcissistic, decadent, dastardly. He's just so delightful and charming in this film, and the sort of evil, toxic bromance he has with Brad Pitt as Louis in this film is just... the first half of the film in that regard, you know, when Brad Pitt becomes a vampire and has to deal with killing, he doesn't want to kill humans, and Lestat is just there just being openly murderous. I mean, it's so entertaining. I could watch it forever, and of course it's set in sort of this just sort of swooping Gothic France, and you know the sort of set design and production value is really great in that regard. The wraparound, the whole journalism thing, it's fine. It's a bit cheesy. This is a very cheesy, very campy film that does nevertheless take its elements seriously, and there are very interesting themes there. There's the whole plague going on. There's a very good melodrama to it. I think the film does lose its way a bit in the second half because Tom Cruise, Lestat, kind of leaves the picture for a long time, and then you're sort of following Brad Pitt, who I find very one note and mopey in this film, sort of, and I love Brad Pitt in most things. I think it's probably down to the direction more, which I find quite clunky, and not all the performances are on the same level, because Antonio Banderas is kind of like on the very camp zone that Tom Cruise is, and Brad Pitt isn't really on that level. And you know, Neil Jordan, I didn't like Byzantium at all, but I absolutely love The Company of Wolves. Probably possibly my favourite werewolf film ever. That's a very high bar. I need to do a version for werewolf films as well. But I think he is a talented director, but I also don't think he's sort of a great director. I think this film is a sort of longer, bigger film than a very low budget production like The Company of Wolves is. I think cracks start to show. It's sort of uneven in places, and you can also tell it's based on a book as well, because I mean the structure of this film, you can feel that it's condensed in sort of 2.5 hours, because the second half of the film is sort of basically like a different thing going on. I mean, the whole aspect with Antonio Banderas and that whole sort of society that they enter, I mean, it has its moments. But for me, I think especially it's brought down by Kirsten Dunst. And like I mentioned earlier with Abigail, the whole child vampire thing, not normally into. I'm not into it at all here. I find her so grating. But I am glad they kill her. Yes, I'm glad they kill children in this film. I really am. I mean, it is quite brutal the way they kill her, and she gets killed by I won't say how. But I do like that. I like they commit to that, although I guess technically she's not spiritually a child at that point. But, you know, I'm glad they can at least do that in this film, but I do find her very grating. Maybe it's just a personal issue, maybe I'm just a sadistic cunt, I kind of am, but yeah, I mean, Interview with the Vampire, it's still very good. It's still, you know, a sweeping gothic epic, and you can't really go too wrong with that. I will say as well, we were deprived of a sequel with Tom Cruise and Christian Slater. Man, that would have been even better, because Christian Slater, I love Christian Slater. Like, imagine Christian Slater from Heathers, but he's a vampire with Tom Cruise. Just imagine the fucking sociopathic banter that you could have there, set in the modern day as well. That would have just been peak. We didn't get it, which makes me very sad, and now they are far too old, even though Tom Cruise is still like dangling out of planes for some reason.
I am the last of my kind, descended from a common roots.
Now, number 12 is Dracula. Not that Dracula, or that Dracula, but this Dracula, 1979's Dracula, with Frank Langella, who I believe was in a very successful sort of Broadway adaptation of Dracula, which is sort of what this film is based around. It's a Universal Pictures production, and it's mostly a remake of the 1931 version. There's quite a few homages to it. You've got Laurence Olivier as the Van Helsing, and you know, I don't like Van Helsing generally as a character, even the book, but Laurence Olivier, he sort of makes him charming. He's a bit phoned in here, to be fair. It's a bit sort of dry and doddery, but It's got also Donald Pleasance as Dr. Seward, I think they call him in this. It's normally Dr. Stewart, I don't know. They always fucking change the name in Dracula, okay, with every character. You can't keep track, really, of what's going on. But he's very, very good and sort of makes up for the fact that Laurence Olivier is kind of phoning it in. Jonathan Harker, really forgetful, but this film is about Dracula. I think what this version of Dracula and what Frank Langella does so well in this film is bring out the romantic, charming side of Dracula. A lot like Bela Lugosi's version, but it's more modernised, so more is going on, and you really get him as a sort of physical lover here. You can sense the passion behind his romance with Lucy in this film. And I find that really compelling because I find myself connecting to and understanding and feeling the charm of Dracula without that diminishing his sort of terror as a sort of evil force. You know, unlike Coppola's Dracula, which, spoilers, not in this list, okay? The effects in that film, I mean, they're better than this film for sure. The amazing visual and set design and costumes and everything, absolutely stunning. The plot, the stupid, weepy, forlorn romance turning, you know, Dracula into this sort of sad lover. I just find that so diminutive and diminishing of the evil of his character. And the acting, I just find it sort of campy in the wrong way. Okay, Keanu Reeves, I love him, but no. So I do actually prefer 1979 Dracula, and not many people have actually seen it. Only 11,000 views on Letterboxd, which is very low for me. I mean, I got quite a great cast. It was a relatively big budget Universal Pictures film, you know, but I guess not many people saw it, sadly. It's got some great set design in there. It's also very funny. It's got very witty moments. It's also very creepy in certain moments. I mean, when Mina, spoiler alert, it dies in her bed, I find that very chilling. It's probably too fast-paced, though my general taste is for much slower, more meditative films, and we'll get onto that much later on. You know, I think it is a very solid Dracula. I watched the desaturated version because there's sort of two versions. I still thought the scenery and the set design popped with the desaturated version. There's a very pale look to it. I guess the thing worth mentioning is, again, they switch around the character names like Mina and Lucy and all that crap, but also there's no Transylvania in this film. The elements are very much rejigged around. I mean, it sort of begins with the Demeter, if you will, and then he sort of whisks into the sort of lordly manner, and you've got Dracula actually really socialising all these characters from the start before they know who he is, and I really like that spin on it. I don't feel like you need Transylvania and all that stuff in every film. And also, they have all the Whitby accents in this film, which is someone who's recently been to Whitby for Whitby Goth Fest. I can appreciate that. I mean, they actually use stuff from Whitby and Scarborough. They name drop Scarborough in this film, which is where I stayed, and you know, that's nice. That's bonus points from me, and I just knocked this fucking shelving unit. But yes, 1979 Dracula. It's very solid, actually. Very underrated, in my opinion. And Frank Langella has, I think, one of the best performances of Dracula because, yes, he's evil, but I can really feel his charm without that degrading from how evil he is.
The devil has sent me twins of evil.
Number 11 is Twins of Evil. Not the first Hammer horror film on this list, and not the last. I do love Hammer horror, and I think this one's a really underrated one. It's part of a trilogy, I think, and again, the biggest issue of this film is no Christopher Lee. There's sort of Count Carstein instead. I mean, he's very young and charming in this film, a better antagonist as a vampire than in Brides of Dracula, in my opinion, and I just think this film is absolutely splendid. I mean, you've got a Peter Cushing who is at the top of his game, a sort of very bitter, cold, ultra-conservative, sort of Puritan crusader who's going on these sort of witchcraft rampages, you know, burning young girls and, you know, killing innocent girls alongside the actual vampires. And it's quite an interesting morality tale in that regard because you have the sort of three factions, if you will, of the sort of goodies who are sort of, you know, moral sort of moderate Christians, and then the Peter Cushing side who are sort of rampaging anti-witchcraft crusaders who are sort of very Puritan, and in that they become very bloodthirsty. And then you've got the sort of hedonistic, sort of just completely immoral decadence of the vampires, and it's sort of, you know, reckoning with all those three sides. And I actually find it a very sort of interesting, sort of religiously interesting film in that regard, and sort of how it navigates that and how it sort of navigates sort of Christian puritanicalism for a sort of modern audience and sort of brings out the good and the bad in it. I find that really interesting, and it's probably one of the deeper Hammer horror films in that regard. And I just think, I mean, look, okay, the cast other than Peter Cushing, it's got two playmates as the twins in the lead roles in this, one of whom is seduced by the vampire. They're not completely terrible. They're sort of sloppy in a charming way, as per Hammer horror. The characters, I mean, you're not going to remember any of them. Again, Peter Cushing really does stand out, and it's got a great decapitation as well, I have to say. The decapitation, when it happens to a major character, just suddenly, it's wonderful. The set design and everything, it's a bloody Hammer horror film. It's so just comfy and immersive. I mean, these films are really just like a warm blanket, and I just never really hear this one talked about enough. I got it on like a Blu-ray for like £1 at CEX one time. I hadn't really heard of it. I just saw it there on the shelf. That's what I like doing in that store. I sort of just browse stuff. I was like, oh, I've not heard of that. This looks cool. And I got it, and I was really pleasantly surprised by this. I think it's one of the absolute best horror films ever made, along with maybe a film or two coming up. Yes, I said or two. That means there's not just the obvious one. But yes, Twins of Evil, I really do highly recommend it. It's one of the sort of later Hammer films while they were still good, and it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. Number 10. Now, it's number 10 in the list. You might be thinking, have we reached the great films yet? Because I hope it's been clear that while I really enjoy a lot of the films that have come before, they're all very solid films, but none of them are great films. I mean, the Hammer horror films and things like Abigail, they're really fun and really splendid, but they're not hitting the heights of greatness, if you know what I mean. And the films that are more serious, I also find to be more flawed so far on this list. So, is number 10 a great film? No, unfortunately. You might be thinking, top 10 of all time, are you really a vampire fan? I am, really, but at the same time, I do have high standards. I do like this film a lot. And why am I holding out on it? Because it's a recent release, and I've been wrestling with it a lot, and it's Nosferatu. Robert Eggers' Nosferatu. I love The Lighthouse so much. It's a really funny film. It's a really playful film. It's not a very serious film, and I think that's why I love it, because it's so stylised and intimate with its scope, and its dialogue is really investing because it's so quippy and funny, and it brings out the best in the actors. And because it's unserious, I don't mind the fact that it's basically copying so much from other films, and it's so rigid in its sort of historical devotion. Here with Nosferatu, it's doing all those things. Robert Eggers, he's against improvisation. He basically bends his script around history. To me, I find that very stifling for a very serious, sombre, epic film like Nosferatu. I had the same experience actually with The Northman, because I just think that ultimately he doesn't delve into the sort of human depth of the melodrama as much as he should, in my opinion. I really loved the first part of this film. I think that Nicholas Hoult and Lee Rose Depp do a really great job at making you feel the love between the characters, and I found that really investing, because then basically the equivalent of Jonathan Harker, I think he's called Thomas in this, has to go sent on this sort of mission. The story of Dracula, right? He has to go do a sort of deal with Dracula for basically he's a real estate agent, and the build up to Orlok's castle is spellbinding in this. It's like the best stuff from The Lighthouse. The lighting, the really trippy editing, the way that the perspectives and the shots sort of flow into one another. It's so eerie, and it really made me feel something. And I wish the whole film was like that. And I really got into it in the first act. But then, as you get to see Orlok, and while his visual presence is really imposing, this big sort of hulking zombie behemoth, and Bill Skarsgård's voice is really booming and really transforms into the role, Orlok has nothing to say. We'll get on to another version of Nosferatu shortly, but Orlok has nothing to say here. He doesn't really symbolise anything other than himself. He's basically just what would 19th or 18th century peasants find really horrifying as a vampire, and he's that. But it's not translated into anything deeper. And then that comes through into the sort of middle of the film, where all the dialogue is just very dull, bland, like platitudes about evil, and it's sort of this is what the characters would say at the time, sure. But where's the depth? Where's the poetry to it? Where's the feeling? I mean, Robert Eggers says it's a sort of lifelong passion project, but I don't really feel it. I feel like a lot of the film is sort of going through the motions, particularly in the middle act, where it feels like it's just sort of hitting beats and going by. There's not really that time spent to really ruminate on each moment of the film. It's, you know, over 2 hours long, but I feel like it goes by, it rushes by. And I know a lot of people say that as a compliment when they're talking about films. Oh, it was 2 hours, but it rushed by. I don't actually like that. Okay, I like it when films are really slow and they really brood on things for quite a while. Nosferatu has so much sort of dialogue. A lot of the supporting characters are really beefed up roles compared to the other versions of Nosferatu, which sure is truer to the book, but I find parts of this film so rambly and repetitive. And I look forward actually to the extended cut of the film, because I actually think that more scenes would add to the film, in that it would make it less dull in the middle. I mean, I didn't find it boring, but I know a lot of people who did, because I think if you add more scenes, it can recontextualise the ones that already are and break up the structure, and therefore make all of it more interesting. It's sort of funny how boredom works in that regard, that actually something that's longer can be less boring than something that's shorter if there's sort of more there that's interesting. And it's true actually of something slower as well. I found things that are fast paced ultimately less interesting than if they're slower, because if you're slower moment by moment, then each moment has so much more depth to it, you know. And that's what the build up to Auroch's Castle has, you know. It's this extended sequence of no dialogue, and that's Robert Eggers' strength. He's a really good visual director, but at the same time I do feel like it's a bit like a sort of horror Christopher Nolan. And sorry if you love Christopher Nolan, I don't hate Christopher Nolan, but my point is, just like Nolan, he's more of a technician than he is a poet, you know. He doesn't really have anything to say. The film isn't coming from deep inside his heart. He's sort of, if I was being cynical, he's basically thinking about how could this impress, you know, the viewer. And of course it is impressive. I mean, technically the way they achieve the set design, the production value, the lighting, everything, it's really beautiful and impressive. It's like pure, it's basically a film bro's eye candy, okay? But that's my kind of issue, you know, is that when I go for an art house film, a highbrow, swooping, dramatic epic like this, it's not like with something like Abigail or a Hammer horror film, okay, where that film is just a B movie, where I'm expecting eye candy. With an art house film like this, I'm expecting high art, I suppose, to put it that way. I'm expecting not, you know, Tarkovsky, but at the same time, you know, Tarkovsky is one of Robert Eggers' favourite directors, and you know, it's inspired with the way the shots move and the lighting and everything, but there's no deeper, I guess, poetry, no symbolism to it. Again, we'll get onto this with another version of Nosferatu later on, but you know, I find it very frustrating in that regard. I mean, look, the ending is brilliant. Most of the acting, other than Aaron Taylor Johnson's, Aaron Taylor Johnson's accent, I found that really annoying. But all the other acting is brilliant. And again, the visuals are consistently just stunning, and it's a very atmospheric film. And I do probably need to watch it again, because maybe, actually, hopefully, my expectations sort of warped my relation to it a bit, and hopefully the extended cut will enhance it as well. But yeah, I had issues with this film, but it is still so atmospheric and just well done. I just think the script is lacking. I think the structure is lacking a bit, but I don't think any adaptation of Dracula has been truly perfect. But maybe we'll get onto one or two that are very close. But yes, Nosferatu, I need to see it again. I know a lot of people love this one. I know actually a lot of people in my boat felt mixed on it. It's still my top 10 vampire films, so take that as you will.
This is not Lucy, the sister you loved. It's only a shell, possessed and corrupted by the evil of Dracula.
Number 9 is Horror of Dracula. Yes, it's the classic Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, Hammer horror Dracula. And I think this is a brilliant film. Why is it not higher? Well, I think this film has got a lot going on thematically, that I wish was explored a bit more. I mean, look, I wish we had a bit more Christopher Lee, okay, but I just love Christopher Lee as Dracula, and in none of his films he really has a huge role, which I get why they do that, for the effect, so that his character stands out more, but you know, I also want a bit more. But this film you know, it's really kinetic, it's really dynamic. I mean, the whole sort of action at the end as well, you know, with Peter Cushing, Christopher Lee running around the set, it's really energising. And then the whole opening of this film, you know, it's got a sort of meta delight to it with Jonathan Harker already there as a vampire hunter. It's such a great twist, and sort of the red, bright Technicolor blood. I love that so much, and just the set design in this film, the effects even all holds up, and everything really holds up in this film. And it's like the best Hammer horror films. It can sort of have very quick sequences that really are so intensely visceral, like when they're sort of putting the stake in. I think is it Lucy in this version or Mina? I can't fucking remember. They always change their names around for some bloody reason. But you know, she gets stabbed, and you've got, you know, Holmwood who goes, oh, and he's like clenching himself, and it's really quite a powerful scene. And you've just got that just warm presence of Peter Cushing there as Van Helsing. He just comes in, he's like, you feel so secure with him. I mean, sure, there's still the challenge, the sort of malice of Dracula, and the fact that he challenges Peter Cushing as Van Helsing because of how warm and wholesome and secure that Van Helsing feels as with Peter Cushing. You know, it makes Dracula that much more intimidating. It gives him a real sort of fight, you know. But just these actors, Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, they are just some of the best to ever do it. I mean, you just feel that comfort, that presence around Peter Cushing that he manages to just capture in all of his films, even when he's a sort of horrible bastard, you know, like in Twins of Evil. He just has that presence that invites you in, and Christopher Lee is just this maniacal, just imposing creep, and he's just is he my favourite Dracula? We'll get on to my favourite Dracula, but Christopher Lee is really up there as well. I mean, on par with Frank Langella for me, ahead of Gary Oldman, and unfortunately ahead of Bill Skarsgård's Orlok, because I don't think he was given enough material. Ahead of Max Schreck's Nosferatu as well. Unfortunately, I'll explain when we talk about the other Nosferatu why that film is not on my list. But yes, Dracula, it's quite a gory film, you know, and erotic in many ways, and it still stands up to the test of time, in my opinion, to this day. It's a brilliant film. I wished it was longer. I wish it had a bit more beef to it, if you know what I mean. But it's wonderful. But there is actually another Hammer horror Dracula film I actually slightly prefer. And kill me for this, but this is...
Would you be willing to sell your souls to the devil?
Taste the blood of Dracula. I really, really, really like this film. Okay, for one big reason, actually, it almost gives you the perspective of Dracula in certain sequences. I mean, the end of the film in the church, the climax, you have Dracula's perspective as this church gets re-sanctified. He's sort of freaking out, is all trippy, and you know, it's like it actually puts his perspective. It's like, wow, it's really quite affecting and striking, and I really love that in this film. I can't think of many Dracula films ever that have really done that. And the other thing with that is because you're following these three patriarchs, and they enter the sort of seedy underbelly of their Victorian society, and they're just basically just practicing in whatever decadence they can get their hands on, and because they're fucking morons, they're twats, and they summon Dracula, you know, they're basically getting punished for that, and one of them in particular is just a horrible bastard. You sort of start rooting for Dracula's reign of terror, and it's very rare in a Dracula film, unless you're a sick bastard, I guess, like me, that you're really rooting for Dracula to actually succeed in killing, and this film does that in a really fun way. I mean, there's still good, likeable characters in this film. None of them are, of course, a patch on Christopher Lee, who, to be fair, he's not in this film that much, and when he is, it's a bit goofy, like number 2, you know, when he kills him, and it's funny. And there's also no Peter Cushing either. There is Ralph Bates, who's a great Hammer horror character actor. He's in the start of this film, and you know, the cast are very charming. They're sort of silly, sort of campy Hammer horror-y style, but just the whole film just has such a great structure where it's these patriarchs getting bumped off one by one, and they're sort of trying to fight off Dracula, and just like great ending. I love that ending. That ending alone is why it's up here so high. This film is really underrated, in my opinion. It's really fun from start to finish. It just captures a sort of repression and decadence that I think Dracula is kind of all about. And even though Dracula isn't really in it massively, because it's sort of a lot of his servants doing the bidding as they get seduced and possessed by him. But yes, Taste the Blood of Dracula. I really, really like this film.
At midnight, all sorts of evil spirits are set loose.
Number 7 is Nosferatu the Vampire, 1979, directed by Werner Herzog. And now we are truly in the great films. Why not 1922 Nosferatu? Well, as I said at the start, I don't really click with old films that much, and while I love the expressionism and sort of dreamlike style of the original with its striking imagery, I find it very hard to get into as a narrative. I mean, the acting, for example, as Thomas in that film is so over the top that I sort of struggle to get invested in it. But this version of Nosferatu is exactly what I want from a film like this. It is slow, it is meditative, it very much takes its time. Like opposite to Robert Eggers, it feels often very improvised, and so much more focused on the truth of the human nature behind the character of Dracula, because he's actually called Dracula in this as well, than the sort of realism. You know, that's what Herzog spoke about, and I think it captures a lot of symbolism about sort of strife and struggle and death in Germany at the time after World War II, the sort of bleakness in that, and it's sort of this plague of bleakness. And vampirism here is sort of like an addiction, a sort of animalistic monstrosity that comes up that the person that is afflicted with the vampirism is sort of struggling with, and there's a real bleakness to that. But it's also very funny. It's very surreal, and there's a lot of wit to this film, sort of deadpan humour to it, and you know, it's also really hypnotic. The thing about this film is it has Klaus Kinski as Dracula, and I think Klaus Kinski's Dracula is not only the best Dracula ever put to screen, I think he delivers one of the greatest performances ever. I really do. I think it is staggeringly brilliant. The level of detail and sort of nuanced humanity he brings to Dracula here, the sort of the loneliness, the sort of pitiful, sort of withered up, shriveled sort of nature to Dracula, the sort of hesitating and scrounging around, and he's like an animal, but he's contemplative and haunted, and you really feel Dracula whilst also being very creeped out by Dracula, and it's such a striking and just staggeringly brilliant performance. There is something just decrepit and dying about the character, where you really feel he's undead, more than in the Robert Eggers version, where yes, he's a zombie and rotting and everything, but here there's a real sense that that his soul is dead. There's this moment where he tries to drink Bruno Ganz's blood, and he's sort of hesitating and moving around, and he doesn't really know how to conduct himself, and then he just sort of leaps at him like an animal. And I just thought, you know, it's not diminishing his terror in any way, because it's more terrifying to see this creature, this human creature, who is completely transformed into this husk. And the way, for example, in the scene where he sort of approaches Lucy's room, the climax of the film, and that scene, by the way, one of my favourite scenes in any film ever. The way it's just so slow and takes its time as he sort of creeps down, and it's like one of those sort of classic Gothic paintings with this chiaroscuro lighting, which is very black, and you know, it contrasts the sort of wider naturalism of the rest of the film, and it's just such a beautiful scene. The way he caresses her and she pulls him in, and it's so much more romantic, not just sexual, but romantically erotic, much more than in the new Dracula, which is very sexual, very explicit, and I don't mind that, but this film is more affecting in that regard. And the other thing is, I find this film so much more atmospheric than the new one, which is, like I said, very atmospheric as it is, but how Herzog captures nature, captures mood through the level of time and feeling he gives to the flow of each shot and each scene. It's so absorbing, and just it's just a stunning film. Nosferatu, it's hypnotic, it's deeply symbolic, it's funny, it's very bleak, and Klaus Kinski as Nosferatu, as Dracula, brings out so much tormented humanity in there. Renfield, you know, he's not very developed in this. He's kind of silly. Unfortunately, it's my biggest issue of the film. Why can't we have a more developed Renfield in these kind of films? It's such a shame. That's the one thing I think the 1931 version does better than any. But this is still, you know, in my opinion, it's slow, it's hypnotic, it's weird. Certainly watch the German version over the English version, because they sort of back-to-back English version. The native version, you know, you get more out of the performances that way. I think it's a film that's grown on me so much after I watched it, and I sort of ruminated on it more, and I do think it's probably a masterpiece. Yes, Nosferatu the Vampire is brilliant. And probably Klaus Kinski found a kindred spirit with Dracula, because Klaus Kinski, if you don't know, is, let's just say, a bad person. So he probably related to the sort of monstrosity of the vampire. And maybe that's why it is one of the best performances ever, and the images just look straight like they're out of one of those sort of Gothic sleep paralysis demon paintings, you know, and it's a brilliant film.
The year is 12,090 AD. It is a world where humanity is ruled by vampires.
Well, number 6 is Vampire Hunter D, the 80s original, and I just love this film. It's short, it's sweet, it's brutal, it's full of anime gore, just complete anime indulgence, you know, sort of funny anime eroticism of the time, you know, it's just sort of a retro-futuristic gothic extravaganza, you know. I mean, vampires, werewolves, big castles, sort of steampunk technology in this sort of apocalyptic wasteland. It's just an aesthetic delight, and here I find the characters a lot more fun rather than annoying. I mean, their character designs are great, the action's great, and you've got D as this sort of stoic, tormented hero, and everyone's fun and likeable and not irritating. And sure, the plot's not deep at all. It's just fun and sort of kitschy and pulpy, and it just makes way for this just great gore and just sort of very sort of grimy, grossy, sort of just charming, edgy delight, you know, just severed limbs and just brutality, and it's just such a charming film in that way. And again, it's not very long, and you know, as much as I said that Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust is such a beautiful looking film, there is something about the vintage charm of the sort of 80s animation here that I almost prefer. I mean, maybe I don't prefer it, but it has got a sort of clunkiness to its motion, but it does look really beautiful even so, and the music as well, and it's just a fucking great film. Okay, I really don't have much to say on this because it's a very simple and short film, but it just got such a sense of sort of world building and just imagery with its character designs that I just thought was just utterly delightful. Honestly, there's no thematic depth or anything I can spew about this film, but just watch it. You know, Vampire Hunter D, it's only like 85 minutes or something like that, so absolutely watch it, especially if you're an anime fan, but even if you're not.
Look, I know it's crazy, I know that,
But number 5, well, look, these films I suppose are all sort of indulgent for me, and number 5 is Fright Night, the original 1980s Fright Night. This is just pure 80s cheese, like a mature cheese, you know, a good cheese, and I absolutely love it for that. I mean, it's all about the sort of stranger danger, domestic fear that was sort of around in the 80s at the time. Oh, my neighbour might be a serial killer, he's a vampire, woo! And that's sort of the plot, you know. Teenager thinks his neighbour is a vampire, no one believes him. Spoiler alert, he's a vampire. Chris Sarandon as the vampire in this, oh, he's so charming. He's so delightfully charming that you also kind of root for him, you know what I mean? Sure, he's a nasty, evil guy who abducts women and kills them all, blah blah blah, but he's sexy, you know, and that goes a long way. And you know, and I'm not a gay guy in it at all, but Chris Sarandon is a very cool man, and yes, so just this film is just so delightful. I mean, the soundtrack is just pure 80s shit. I love a lot of 80s music, but a lot of it is crap, and a lot of it is crap in this film. But hey, you've got this amazing nightclub sequence where he's just seducing the girl, and like, is it that he's hypnotising her, or is she just like, well, damn, that's just Chris Sarandon as a vampire, I guess I will just go to him anyway, you know, and then he has no reflection in the mirror, and that's a great scene as well, when you've got Roddy McDowall as the sort of TV vampire hunter, who's not an actual vampire hunter, and he sort of drags along with the main character to go to the house to sort of get him out of his delusion, and then at the end of the scene, after it's all seemingly sorted out, and then he sees his mirror, and then Chris Sarandon is like, he's got no reflection, and he sort of panics to himself, and he's like, yes, he sees it, and it's so satisfying, because, you know, it builds up to the rest of the film, and then they go into the house, and you've got his fucking assistant who's a zombie and blows up into like a million fucking pieces of goo and bones, and it's just like, yes, okay. The effects still hold up really well, and all the transformation stuff, and one guy's like half werewolf at one point. That character's kind of annoying, but you know, it's annoying in, I guess, a fun way, and it all holds up, and it's just so charming, and it sort of crystallises the sort of the way in which a lot of these Hammer horror films and these sort of early vampire films and like sort of American Vincent Price Gothic films sort of really cemented themselves in the sort of adolescent consciousness of people at the time, and sort of fused with the idea of sort of, I think, isolation and atomization and sort of lack of community sort of really began, especially in the sort of 80s suburbia of America, and it's really interesting how that just translates into this kind of film, you know, where it's like, my neighbour's a vampire, and following all those tropes and just playing around with it. And I just think the original Fright Night is just a wonderful, wonderful film. It's just turn your brain off, have a great time. And like I say, you know, issues of Nosferatu because it's basically eye candy. And sure, this film is basically eye candy, but it's not meant to be art house. This is meant to be accessible. Whereas Nosferatu, you think, well, it's kind of meant to be art house and interesting, but it's more entertainment. It annoys me when art house films have to descend into entertainment, because entertainment is what these kinds of films are meant for. Art house films are meant for being artsy and out there and weird. So you might call me a hypocrite, maybe I am, but that's my logic. But yes, Fright Night, brilliant. Number 4. Well, I think this film is a masterpiece, and this film is A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. Probably the best new vampire film that brings vampirism into the modern age and gives it a sort of new spin that we've had decades, really, thinking about it. Just Iranian vampire western. I mean, that's just a great fucking premise, isn't it? And this film, it's got this sort of comic book aspect to it. It's all this very sort of high contrast, black and white, which, if you couldn't tell, is kind of a vibe that I like. And it's just got such a great world building to it. The way it uses sort of industrial and environmental sound to sort of build its world, it really sucks you in. And it is a very slow, meditative film that is very chilling at moments, but also very funny and very romantic and very sentimental, because you've got this vampire and she's dressed up in a nun's outfit and she's going on a skateboard and she's going on this moral crusade, and she's really terrifying at points when she hunts down certain victims in the streets of Bad City, but she's also like this nun on a skateboard, and she's listening to like new wave pop music and dancing in her room, and it's like it's this contrast between this sort of imposing vampiric force and this girl that you really relate to. And it's sort of, you know, the whole idea of A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, you know, it's like the whole idea that she's sort of a victim, but she's also this sort of threatening, lonesome force that's prowling around after you. And it's such a great spin. It's such a masterful, really genius film in that regard, because it just covers so many levels. You know, it's atmospheric, it's slow, meditative, it's really funny, it's got some really great kills, it's romantic. I mean, when she hooks up with this sort of main character, this everyman, is sort of styled like a Western guy, and he abducts his cat as well, and the cat's great, and they have a romance, and they sort of, you know, connect, and he's dressed up as Dracula and he's on drugs and he's like, I'm Dracula, and then she's an actual vampire. It's so cute, it's so funny, it's so cool. This film like fucking has everything, in my opinion, and the way it uses like Iranian sort of vampire equivalent folklore to incorporate its like imagery as well, it's just great. This film is just so genius and so much fun and so creative, and not even very high budget either, and it's really just a really stimulating example of what you can do with filmmaking. And the way it turns vampirism into sort of modern concept of actually vampirism is, you know, it's gone from, you know, this spiritual horror to sort of aristocratic terror to, you know, sexuality to drugs and addiction to sort of romantic heartthrob, which yes, there's a bit of that in this film, but here it's this spin of she's like a moral crusader, and vampirism is sort of, she's using the evil to fight the bad people of Bad City, and it's like a sort of spiritual moral avenger. And it's really interesting because, of course, at the same time, you know, her commitment to moral purity stops her from seeing the sort of humanity of the people around her. You know, not everyone who's doing bad things in Bad City is necessarily a completely bad person, and that puts her at odds with her love interest. And there's just so much going on in this film, the way it comments on things like purity and morality and things like that, and obviously how that reflects within Iran as well, but it's all shot in America for mostly legal and funding reasons. But it's just a brilliant film. I think it's a total masterpiece. I think it's the best vampire film that's been made in at least, like 20-30 years, maybe more. I think this is a fantastic film.
Pick up everyone, a wakey.
There's 3 films I prefer, and I'm a fucking moron because I completely forgot the next film is actually from 2014. So I'm a liar, so I've just completely broken everything I said, but I guess I don't really count this film as a serious film in the way I do the others, because this film is What We Do in the Shadows. Okay, look, this is a masterpiece. I guess in my brain, I count comedy, sort of separately from most other genres, which you would say is probably very unfair because this is a comedy mockumentary, and it's actually very smart. You know, the way it explores like vampire daily life, like they can't see in the mirror, so they have to sort of draw one another to see how their outfits look, and that's just obviously a comedic bit right there. I mean, it's actually really clever. It makes me figure like, how would I live as a vampire? You know, I can't eat chips, I can't do this or that, you know, can't deal with the sunlight. You know, it's actually quite fascinating, and just hanging out with these just really delightful characters as they deal with their sort of flatmate business, and they go out to the pub with one another, and they're all just basically just a gang of goth lads, you know, going out to the clubs and having a good time. And it's just such a comforting, just wholesome film. It really is. It's one of the most wholesome films I've ever seen. I can't compare it to the series. I've not seen the series. I don't watch TV or miniseries because I'm a fucking idiot. I'm a disgraceful human being, okay? For some reason my brain is like, if it's over 3 hours, don't watch it. I can't manage my time, even though I spend like 10 hours just doing bullshit every day. So, you know, I'm a fucking idiot, okay? But this film, if the series is half as good as this, I should watch it and I'll love it, because this film is just peak comfort for me. Just spending time with these vampires, all the quips, all the homages, all the gags. It's just consistently fucking hilarious and just sweet and wholesome. And the way it's sort of basically devoted to Stu, this actual guy, this actual IT guy that Taika Waititi gets in the film to join this sort of vampire group, and he's not an actor, he's just sort of in there, and he didn't realise how big his role was. It's just such a wholesome film, and I wish we had more films like that, you know, nowadays, that are just about sort of having fun, being wholesome, you know, friends connecting with one another, and sort of delighting in a genre. You know, why can't we have that as much anymore? I feel like the last 5-10 years, because this film, fucking hell, is 10 years old now, you know, I feel like the last 10 years films have got so cynical and bitter, but this film is just so positive. I just love it so much for that reason. What We Do in the Shadows, somehow, if you've not seen it, absolutely see it. It's the best 80-90 minutes you can really have if you're a vampire fan. And you know what, even if you're not that much of a vampire fan, if you're not a vampire fan and you've got this far into the video, fucking well done to you, by the way. Yes, this film is just perfect. So that brings me on to number 2. Now, what is my second favourite vampire film ever? I think number 1 is fairly obvious based on things I've got in my room, based on the fact that I am a goth. You can probably guess number 1 quite easily. But what is a vampire film that I think is better than Bela Lugosi's Dracula, than The Lost Boys, than Fright Night, than Nosferatu and A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, that I professed were masterpieces? What is a film that I come back to more, that I think about more, that I feel more, that influences me more culturally and just in terms of my just sort of energy? You know, what is a film that really sticks to my soul more than any of those films? A film that I think is unironically a great film. It's Vampire's Kiss. Oh yeah, Vampire's Kiss with Nicolas Cage. I fucking love this film so much, and I don't just mean because it's a meme, okay? We all know the bloody memes, the bloody alphabet, the bloody, you don't say, the I'm a vampire, I'm a vampire, just amazing memes, and just, he's going insane. He thinks he's a vampire, but obviously he's not, and it's peak humour. And this film does know it's funny. It's not like a sort of meme in that it's like so bad it's good. This film knows what it's doing, but it's also quite sad. I think this film is genuinely quite intelligent, because you're witnessing this character basically go down this delusion of vampirism to escape from his sort of mundane corporate life. And obviously he's also this sort of horrible, narcissistic, psychopathic abuser, yeah, but you do feel sorry for him. I mean, there's a horrible scene where he sort of sexually assaults a woman who, I can't remember her name, okay, none of the characters other than Nicolas Cage are really very important at all in this film, but that's horrible. But then he tries to kill himself, he can't control himself, and then he's like, boo-hoo, boo-hoo, and you think, that's really funny, but it's also so absurd. Nicolas Cage's performance is so extreme that it almost goes past and beyond being just funny into being genuinely quite affecting, and it really struck me in that film the way it captures the sort of insanity of being stuck in this sort of corporate grind. The way it illustrates that, yes, it's very funny, but it's also somewhat disturbing. You know, the way he sort of becomes so deluded into being a vampire, and he eats an actual cockroach, he like captures birds on the streets, and he's wearing his fake teeth, and he's having delusions about this vampire woman, and it is obviously so fucking funny, and just it's just so brilliant in that regard. And the set pieces, the gags. I mean, my favourite scene, one of them anyway, is towards the end, where he's basically talking to a wall because he's having delusions about his sort of therapist meeting. He's sort of fantasizing about it, and she introduces him to basically like his perfect girlfriend, and they connect with everything. You think, oh, they're finally having a perfect relationship inside his head, and then immediately they start arguing, and he's sort of shouting and swearing at her. It's like, yes, this is exactly how fucking narcissistic abuser works. It's just so fucking funny, and just Nicolas Cage's performance. He's freaking out, yes, and Peter Lowe, wow, and just talking to the wall, and just all delirious, and then he just goes on the street, and like they're all non-actors as well on the street. He's just harassing, like, I'm a vampire, the sun, kill me, and it's just, it's so fucking funny. It is just. It's just a delightful film. It really it is. And it was written, by a guy who wrote After Hours, another fucking fantastic film, by the way. Many people will probably say better than Vampire's Kiss. Fair enough on that point. But he wrote that and this, and they were the only two scripts that he actually wrote in terms of like feature films that got made. Which is like, if you're gonna make two like feature scripts in your life and have it be those two, fucking good on you, mate, you know. And that's pretty interesting. But the film is made like basically a Lifetime TV movie. You know, it's got goofy bat effects. Again, no one is at all interesting or even that well performed outside of Nicolas Cage. People think it probably doesn't have the intellect and the sort of awareness that it has, because the rest of the film is sort of made like such a sort of cheap, basic way. But I think that adds to the film for me, because you've got the juxtaposition between the sort of surreal insanity of Nicolas Cage and the mundanity of the rest of the film that actually adds to its themes and makes you really feel it, and it makes it all the more funny, and just, you know, I think its lack of stylization in that regard actually works in its favour. But yes, Vampire's Kiss, it's more than just a meme, though the memes are just wonderful. And it also makes me think, you know, if it wasn't a meme, if these weren't culturally recognised, would I like it as much? Would I like it more or less? Because maybe I'd be more able to critically evaluate it and appreciate it as its own object. But on the other hand, it's just a delight in, like, you know, the memes, and everyone knows the memes, and it's sort of a cultural unity there. When the scene comes up, oh, he's doing the alphabet scene, and you know, you all, come and watch this, and you know, there is a sort of unifying charm to it in that way, that if it wasn't a cultural sort of icon, then you know, would it be as pleasurable in the same way as something like The Room is? But this, I would argue, unlike something like The Room, is actually a very good film.
Forever and ever.
But, of course, there is a number one, and of course it's bloody obvious. Look at my shirt, look at this Blu-ray right here. It is none other than The Hunger, because this is the goth movie. Okay, this movie is a cultural goth landmark. I mean, the whole intro with Bela Lugosi's dead, Bauhaus performing live, intercut with David fucking Bowie as a fucking vampire. I mean, what more can you fucking ask for? Okay, this movie is made for me, and that scene brings you just right into the mood, the viscerality of it, the sort of goth atmosphere, and the way it sort of Tony Scott uses so much intercutting. And it's his first feature film, by the way. R.I.P. Tony Scott. And you know, just seduces you into this really, I mean, it is a very seductive atmosphere, and the way that they kill them in the opening scene. You've got Bela Lugosi playing, and it's such a composed sequence. Like, the editing really brings it together, and the song just works so well. And also, by the way, this film is what put Ankhs as the sort of goth symbol. Because it's sort of an Egyptian symbol, and the character, particularly in the book of Catherine Deneuve, is sort of from Egypt, ancient Egypt, and they use their Ankhs to sort of slice their throats in this film, and that's sort of how it came into the goth culture. So we owe this film for that. And yeah, I mean, this film is just a pure vibe. It's just the fucking drapery the film uses in its imagery, just the aesthetics, just the look of this film is so perfect and seductive and just delicious, you know. And at the same time, sure, it's a pure vibe, it's really entertaining, it's really seductive, there is also a real tragic heart to this film. I mean, it's not a very long film, but the way it explores like rapid aging and decay through David Bowie's character in that one scene where he rapidly ages, because basically all of Catherine Deneuve's lovers as vampires, they, after a certain amount of 100 years, 200 years, they sort of rapidly decay, and it's really tragic, and it's actually really powerful and disturbing and sad, and the confrontation with death and mortality, which by the way is something that is throughout all of David Bowie's career. So it's really interesting that he was very selective with his scripts, and it's interesting that he took this role given that it's got that element in it. It's a really affecting sequence, and then the second half of the film, it's a bit more pulpy, it's a bit more overtly erotic. You know, Susan Sarandon comes into the bigger picture, and then there's a cameo by Willem Dafoe. He's in a lot of vampire stuff, and he's fun for about 10 seconds. There's also just this idea of the vampires when they age and decay, and they don't actually die. They spend eternity in this kind of mental void, which is like, that's a really terrifying vampire concept that's like not used in anything else that I found really, really striking and powerful. And again, it's vampirism in the modern age, and sort of vampires living out in the modern day and sort of picking off their victims, which it was very interesting. And again, bringing the whole goth angle into it, it's so influential in that regard. And I don't say influential in, oh, it's sort of culturally respectable because it's done this and this and been influential, but I just mean like in terms of it's stimulating for my aesthetics, you know what I mean? It's just so absorbing in that regard, and I love how it does the editing as well and brings things together and just sort of flows from scene to scene. Sure, is it the deepest or best film ever made? Like, I'm sure you could argue many other films. I would probably argue that Nosferatu the Vampire and maybe even A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night are technically better films than this one, but this is also a directional debut, so you know, give it its slack on that regard, I guess. But I will say as well, this film, the original version of this film, was very orange in terms of its colour, a lot like Top Gun, which Tony Scott also directed, but the only version I've seen of this film is very blue, and I don't think that's what Tony Scott intended, and because I thought the sort of cold blue steeliness to this film really enhanced sort of the bleakness of it, and the sort of gothic aesthetics made it feel very cold and icy in a way that really worked. But you know, I guess the oranginess sort of brings out the sort of heatedness and eroticism of the film, because this is a very erotic film. I mean, very seductive actors, let's put it that way. Also, David Bowie wearing a wig for absolutely no reason in the start of the film other than to be cool, I guess. I mean, you know, you're a great film where he's wearing a wig for absolutely no reason. And, you know, it's interesting to me to think that I've only ever seen this film in a technically incorrect colour grading. So I'll be interested to sort of make a reaction video when I finally watch this film in its orangey hue and see if it actually changes how I sort of interact with the film and how I feel about it. But yes, The Hunger is it's spellbinding for me. It's just pure goth aesthetics that makes me so satisfied. It's goth, and I'm a goth, so what can I say? It's my favourite vampire film ever made. But what's yours? So that's been my top 20 vampire films. Of course, if you disagree with me, just remember that my opinion is objective fact, and that if you disagree, it's just a sign that you're a lesser observer of cultural media, at least when it comes to vampires. But no, if there's any film that you think should have been on this list, then mention it to me, because I probably might not have seen it. Or I might have something to say that's very negative about it, and then we can argue in the comments like good gentlemen. And then, of course, if you've got any feedback, because this is my first very unscripted YouTube video, and I like being unscripted, it gives me a level of freedom to rant and to give you a more personal interaction. But please give me feedback, help me grow, because I'm currently unemployed, and I'd rather pretend and delude that I can get a job for doing this bullshit than working in fucking retail for the third time. So please give me feedback and help me, and tell me what's your favourite vampire films. And until then, don't get bitten by a vampire, I guess.